We are moving right along.
We are.
Yeah.
I'm excited about the Bible study you're doing. I'm also excited about the podcast. I just think that there's some synergy going on. And I also think that we're getting a great pull out of the book, out of all the research and out of your entire life story. We're really hitting it from so many different angles. And healing childhood wounds is so important,
Yeah.
unbelievably important.
You will never get where you want to go unless you go through the pain of these childhood wounds. And there probably are some people who don't have childhood wounds, but the vast majority of us would have childhood wounds. Some people may have severe childhood wounds, and we hear stories about that. But I think that there's so you have people that never had any problems. You have people that had nothing but problems. But then you have just the normal people, normal dysfunctional homes. All right. And we're really going to be more helpful to that group of people than anybody else, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, even for you and I, that's also how we grew up.
Yeah.
Right? We grew up in this kind of some things were good, some things were not good.
Right.
And the things that were not good were so deeply confusing. I actually spoke to someone about this one time. I said, I think I had the worst type of home, and that's very aggressive, right? But if you don't know what to expect and you don't know how to operate, and in one moment it's positive and one moment it's negative, and it sends you in a heart whirlwind of confusion to then in the future, like we're talking about the manifestation of childhood wounds at home, you don't always know how to operate.
But the problem there is that you don't know that that's not normal.
Right.
You're just a kid.
Right.
So what happened to you is not your fault. You're just a kid. So you're seeing this back and forth in this chaotic environment, or this unpredictable environment, or this overly strict and structured environment, whatever it is, overly demand. And you don't know that that's not normal. You're just a kid. So you are taking it in, and the damage is being done, but you don't know that it's being done until much later.
This one has always gotten to me. And we're going to get into chapter 11, rethinking your parents' stories. But now here we are. We're going to the past, right? This one has always gotten me. I saw a picture of this somehow in my heart, but it was a mom kind of yelling at her kid, and the kid realizing that he might be able to do something to fix it. So this electrical storm is going on in the kid's brain and heart, and he's like, oh, well, maybe if I go get this for mommy and I give it to her, then mommy will stop yelling, And it's almost like that it's not your fault, but that you can do something about it. And it's like right there, that's where the wound starts to set in, because that's the fixing wound. Like I'm a kid. I don't know how to actually console my mother. I'm not equipped in any way to do this, and I'm not a therapist, and I have no tools to do this. But, maybe if I go grab this thing for mommy and give it to her, it'll make her happy. And the wounds can unravel, and the story can unravel, because what happens if mommy is particularly toxic and she hits that thing out of the kid's hand? Well, now we're getting wound on wound on, you know what I mean? Nothing I do ever helps anyway. You hear people say these things when they're 25, 35, 45. 50. Yeah, well, you never want to connect with me anyway. And, these types of things. And every time we talk about this, it's an argument, and where is it coming from? It's coming from somewhere.
It definitely is. So, well, I think it's so easy to throw our parents under the bus and not consider their stories as well. I know that I was overly harsh with my mom and dad. As I said in the last podcast, I began to soften when I unilaterally forgave my parents at the age of 25. But there were still lots of things that I had not dealt with, and so I was overly harsh with them. In fact, I continued even after I forgave them to not want to spend time at their house and so forth. But as I was putting this book together, I started remembering things that literally, I put out of my mind. So denial can work two ways. It can you can have emotional amnesia about negative things that happened, but then in reaction to the negative things that happen, you can also have emotional amnesia about positive things that happen as well. And so I very clearly realized when I was writing the book after all these years, that there were things that I had either chosen, there are things that I was in denial about or forgotten, chosen not to remember as a way of, I don't want to get too psychological, so I'm not going to say I'm getting back at my parents by not remembering the good things, but you know what I'm saying. So I remembered, it just came out of the blue one day that my mom always signed birthday cards. She put XOXO, love for love and kisses. And I had completely forgotten that she even gave birthday cards, much less had put love and kisses on there. She didn't write the word love, but she put XOXO. And then I've actually got it over here in the library. When I was in high school, she gave me a book called 30 Days to a More Powerful Vocabulary. And I realized as I was writing the book, she must have recognized something in me about my love for words and writing and so forth, that she gave me that book. And that book actually accelerated. I have a fairly decent vocabulary, and I have always pointed back to that book as the starting point.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was a very loving and caring thing your mom did.
Yeah, exactly. But I had put that story out of my mind. And so I think it's important for us in this process of healing, not only to forgive our parents unilaterally, whether or not they're asking for it, whether or not they deserve it. We didn't deserve it either. We got it from Jesus, and so we want to give it to them. But then to also rethink their story so that we're not just having this negative narrative that we're holding on to. And so we know what happened to us. It's not our fault. They are the ones that created the wounds. So what happened to us happened, but the question is, what happened to them? Why are they the way they are? And this chapter helps the reader unpack that and think through it. And there's actually a place to do an exercise in this chapter where they can literally write out some of the things that they remember about their parents that are on the positive side.
It's true.
Somebody may be thinking, I'm not ready for that. Okay, that's fine. That's fine too. But I want you to know that there's a practical tool here for you if you do want to do that.
Yeah, it's almost like some guy telling you, hey, there's a way to make $100 million. And you're like, man, I haven't even made my first million. Like, what are you talking about? But still someone's looking at you. But I just want you to know, I want you to be assured that there is a way and that you can get there. And it's almost like stirring a hunger in you. It's like, this guy came out of a womb just like me. So he knows something that I don't know. I view the healing of wounds very similar. It's like, hey, you know that you can eventually have these amazing dinners potentially with your family sitting around. You guys can hug each other, like all this stuff. Like, what? Like that's possible. It's like, yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. And we need to be real. It may not be possible for a variety of reasons, but you're never going to know unless you give it a shot. And so, what we're doing in this book and through these podcasts and the Bible study is we're trying to do three things. We're trying to help men, first of all, to unravel what happened to them, to understand the problem, where it came from, and how it's manifesting today. That's part one. And then the second part is this healing process, this centuries old, thousands of millennia old healing process, biblical process of healing childhood wounds and other kinds of wounds as well. And then the third part is to talk about how to break the cycle in your own family and for the next generation and the generations that follow. And so an important part of that is rethinking our parents' stories. We know what happened to us, but what happened to them? What happened to them? And as I rethought what happened to my parents, it did create. It was the soil where grace could grow. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It wasn't just an idea anymore. By actually understanding their story and rethinking their story, the details of it, it allowed grace to grow. Peter Ustinov, the British actor and playwright, he said, "Parents are the bones upon which children sharpen their teeth."
Parents are the bones on which children sharpen their teeth.
Isn't that great? And so, rethinking the story is introducing a little bit more grace into that.
Meaning that you might think that you were wronged in all these different ways, but how often were you just totally, right on your parents? You weren't the best children all the time. That's what you're saying.
Well, and they weren't the worst parents all the time.
Right.
That's probably even more it's both, but I'd say it's even more the point that they weren't as bad necessarily as we remember them to be. The narrative gets skewed. I've said this before, so that in every story, the tendency is to view ourselves as the hero or the victim and the other person as the villain. But it's especially true when we come to talking about our relationship with our parents. It's hypersensitive.
I almost feel like God designed it that way too, to some degree. Like we were meant to put our entire hope upon these people who were feeding us, taking care of us, loving us, But it seems that with the fall, that it's just not always the case.
Nothing makes sense unless you factor the fall into it, right?
Right, yeah. You see all these positive, lovely things in the world, and then you might ask yourself, well, why can't it just be positive and lovely all the time? Yeah. And it's like, something bad must have happened. So, okay,
You've heard me say this before, but and I may have said it on a podcast, but I know I've told you. Pascal has this incredible paragraph in his book, Pensies, how it just is beyond the pale that it seems so unfair that humanity could be held accountable for the sins of one man and one woman. And so I did a paraphrase on it. It's almost like a new thought, but I definitely got the kernel of it from Pascal. You know how I like to get these little condensed sentences, and I'll spend a lot of time on them. But one of my sentences that the fall is an offense to human reason, but once accepted, it makes perfect sense of the human condition, and it's just so true.
That's your sentence.
Well, yeah, it is, but I feel like I'm getting it from Pascal. So
I think you're being very nice.
So, but just think about it. I mean, and it's Christians and non-Christians alike, all people, we rail against the world being so broken, so unjust, so unfair, and we want a utopia. We want it to be right, and if the Bible promised a utopia, it would be the whole thing would be a farce. But it doesn't. It describes the world exactly the way we see it. The way we get the world is the world that the Bible talks about. Well, our parents fall into that world just like we fall into that world. And so they had parents, and their parents had parents. And so what happened to them? And so, like in my own case, I don't know much about my mom. My mom was a very private person. She grew up in a home. My grandfather, who died at an early age, but he was a real entrepreneur. He was the big man in town, in a little town up in southern Minnesota, Albert Lee, Minnesota. He owned Lee Soda Tool Company, and he was a farmer and had horses. He actually raced harness horses, those little buggies he traveled around. That was his hobby. He had enough money that he could race harness horses as a hobby. He had an Airstream trailer. He and my grandmother had an Airstream trailer. We have an Airstream trailer. The reason we bought an Airstream trailer is it's nostalgia for me, knowing my grandmother and my grandfather.
Well, also they're awesome.
Yeah, and they're awesome. My joke is that Airstreams are like old white guys. we all look alike, you know.
Airstreams are like old white guys.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But so she came from this, affluent. So she was probably one of five sisters. She was probably, one of the debutantes of this small town, and then my dad came from this incredibly poverty-stricken, broken family. His father left when he was 2 years of age. So my dad, I said this at his funeral, in the eulogy that I gave for my dad, that his mother, May, M-A-E, and my father and his siblings, he was the youngest of four children, my dad. So his father abandoned them when my dad was 2 years of age. His older brother, Harry, the oldest, had three jobs. He worked on a bread truck before school. He worked at a butcher shop after school, and I think at maybe a gas station on the weekends. And then when my dad turned 6, my dad went to work. At 6 years old, my dad had two jobs at the age of 6.
6 years old.
Yeah. And so they would get up. He got up with his older brother, Harry, at 3 a.m., and they would work on the bread truck, and then they had a paper route, and then they had a permanent tardy slip to school. This was before social programs. So back in those days, the communities closed ranks around their poor. And my grandmother had a stroke because of all the pressure. So they had this little farm in Hayward, Minnesota. They lost that. They had to move into town, and there were two of my grandmother's sisters were spinsters, and they lived together. So they took in my grandmother, who now had this stroke, and her four little children. And these three women then raised these four kids in poverty, and only one of them had a job, and that was my Aunt Nina, N-I-N-A. And she was an elevator operator at the Freeborn National Bank in downtown Albert Lea, Minnesota, where they paid her what would today be the sum of about $20 an hour to be an elevator operator, way out, like 2.5 times minimum wage, because again, the communities were closing ranks around their poor, and they knew that. And then my Aunt Nina, every day she would stop by the grocery store in order to get groceries for the day, and had an arrangement. The grocer had an arrangement with her: Nina, you take whatever you need and pay whatever you can. And so this is how my father grew up. And then he ends up marrying the rich girl, one of the rich girl. And so they were these enterprising young couple and so forth. But they were so ill-equipped. Neither one of them, mom or dad, really had ever been equipped. Nobody ever took my dad under their wing and showed him the ropes, taught him what it meant to be a godly man, a godly husband, a godly father. None of that. And so, and my mom, she was, I think she was pretty much on her own. I really don't know much about my mom, very private person, but something happened in my mom's life. I'm pretty sure of it. I just have that intuition that something happened in my mom's life. And so, yeah, I really think they wanted to be good parents, wanted to be the all-American family, but, it just didn't work out. Just didn't work out for them.
First of all, that was beautiful. What I got from that was that you really know your family's history.
Yeah, at least my dad's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
How did you come to know those things?
I sought it out. What young man doesn't want to know his roots or where he came from? And so, maybe not everybody, but I certainly wanted to tease out all the details of that I could.
I don't like offering people emotional hacks because I believe that life is meant to be story and deeply spiritual and not manipulated. But oh my gosh, is that not a sneaky way to start rebuilding some rapport with your family? Ask your dad about, his story.
I love that. I love that.
It's so sneaky.
Well, but in terms of being practical, we want to we're about giving practical help to men. So
Yeah.
that's a great idea.
And if your heart's desire really is for it, whatever the case may be, if
Yeah.
your eventual desire is closeness, well, then you'll want to know those stories. And if your
Yeah.
desire is to just hear your father's story, but genuine love, genuine interest is something special happens when there's genuine interest and not just like some sort of transaction.
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot in that.
Yeah, it's good. It actually reminds me of when we first met.
Yeah.
It was a very genuine moment. No one was hiding anything. I was like, hey, I need help, and I didn't even have the strength to say that, right? I was just like saying it with my spirit, and you said, sure, basically, and like that was very loving. So thank you. All right. So it was interesting. I liked this quote for some reason. It was about your dad. When he became a man, the driving force in my dad's life was to not be like his father. How did you find that out? That's kind of the important thing, rethinking our family stories, right? So the driving force in your dad's life was to not be like his father. Although I don't remember him ever using these exact words, he wanted to break the cycle. He knew there was an intergenerational sickness that needed to be healed. I just think this is such a merciful perspective, right? On someone that you also viewed as wounding you a lot, right? And then you're starting to get this grip of understanding his story. Tell me about your dad. No one showed him the ropes. He's bringing his family to church, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my dad my dad never did anything overtly and intentionally to hurt me. I think that's important to say. Some men would not be able to say that. My dad's, it was passivity and permissiveness, and maybe a little enabling as well, and being absent probably. But even being absent a lot, he was working hard he was a working man, trying to make money to put food on the table and a roof over our head for these 4 little boys that he had. So in some sense, yeah, but I want to respect that, and we should respect that there sometimes, in rethinking our parents' stories, there are good reasons why they weren't around. They were trying to do the right thing for us. Not always the case, but often the case. So yeah, I forgot where we are in the narrative here. You asked a question. I forgot what it was.
Reaching out to the church.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So my father, and I'm assuming my mother too, realized that since they weren't equipped, that they needed to get some moral and religious instruction for their 4 boys, and maybe they felt the need to get some spiritual help for themselves as well. And so we ended up attending a church, and my parents got very active in the church. As a matter of fact, my father got so active, he became the top layman in our church, by the age of 40. So think about it, 40 is not that old, and he was the top layman in the church. Well, how did that happen? Well, when he brought his family to church, the church we attended had a vision to do good works, to do the work of the church. And so there were fertilizer sales, there were rummage sales, there's committee work, blah, blah, blah. My dad had this incredible work ethic because he'd been working since he was 6 years of age. So when they asked my dad if he would work, if he would perform, so it's kind of like the sign over the church I grew up in, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you more work to do."
Right.
And so he responded to that, and he really poured himself into it. But they did not have a plan. So when my dad reached out for the church door, a very sacred moment, that the church did not have a plan for what happened when a young man would open the door and usher his family into the church. So I'm hypothesizing, but it didn't seem like the mature Christian men in that church had ever sat around a table and asked questions. When a young man visits with his family, why did he do that? What are the problems that he's trying to solve? What does he need from us? And how can we give it to him? I think those are four central questions. I've worked all that into, Man in the Mirrors, No Man Left Behind training. That was some of the early thinking that I had. And so, but he did respond to the challenge to do the work. And then what happened was, because he didn't have anything below the waterline, he'd never been discipled, he didn't know how to be, he'd never been trained, equipped, however you want to say it, mentored to be a godly man, husband, and father. He was succeeding at doing church work, but he was not succeeding at being a man, husband, and father. Turns out he was actually a pretty doggone good husband. He really was a great husband to my mom. They were very, very well yoked together. It was a very compatible relationship. But they were so ill-equipped. When I became a teenager, I put them through so much, and they didn't know how to give me boundaries and structure. They didn't know how to put together the right cocktail of love, structure, roots, and wings. So, I'd not heard the words, at least I don't remember hearing the words, not naive enough to say I never heard them, but I don't remember hearing them, which is significant in and of itself. I never heard I love you. I never heard I'm proud of you. And I never had any recollection still to this day of my parents ever saying, we really believe in you. You can do something with your life. Here's some things you might want to know about the opposite gender. No sex education whatsoever. The extent of it was my mother one day did slip a pamphlet across the bench seat of our car as we were driving down the road, eyes forward, and she said, "You should read this."
It feels like a scene from a commercial or something.
It was amazing. Of course, in the booklet, I already knew everything from my friends by then. And my dad never said a word that I can remember about it.
But to your point, you didn't know God's perspective.
Didn't know God's perspective.
You weren't introduced to it through loving and trustworthy sources.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so that was my mom and dad's experience. And so and we're talking about rethinking our parents' story. So part of rethinking our parents' story is understanding that they didn't receive what they should have because of intergenerational dysfunction that they experienced. And then they went to the one place that a man ought to be able to go, God's designated place, to get the actual kind of help that really would make a difference in the person's life, to the Church of Jesus Christ. And they let him down. The mature guys in that church, I think, are culpable for what happened to my family, which, as you know, I quit high school. We de-churched. My parents got their feelings hurt. Something happened in the church, not sure 100% what that was, but I was 16 years old in the 10th grade, and we de-churched. My youngest brother was in the 3rd grade. So from the 3rd grade to the 10th, all of a sudden, whatever infrastructure we did have for moral and religious instruction and nurturing was gone. And so then, and really over the next couple of years, the wheels really, really came off the wagon. So
the whole family.
Yeah, the whole family. I quit high school. My brother followed in my footsteps. He ended up dying of a heroin overdose. My next brother never held a job for more than 6 months until he was 50 years of age. He's a follower of Jesus now. And then my youngest brother is a recovering alcoholic addict and divorced. And my dad just never saw any of this coming. And the nice thing about my dad, he is the most moral person. I've never known anybody more moral than my father. That's his real legacy to his 4 boys is integrity. And so if he was alive today, he would say, okay, I take full responsibility for what happened to my family. And you got to love that. You wish more men would take responsibility for their actions. But I have come to see that the church is culpable for what happened in my family. And I know that because I had the exact opposite experience when as a young husband, ended up taking my wife to church.
So now a second church door handle comes into the story. So the first door handle is your father's.
Yeah.
It's so poetic. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And he reaches out, and it seems that this place is supposed to be the place where these practical lessons from Jesus to literally bless our lives should be, poured out.
Yeah.
But instead, it's an extra set of hands, work, and earn your way. And now you're layman and, work and honor, right?
Yeah.
But then a second hand reaches out for a church, and it's you, right, with your wife and your kids too at the time, or no?
No, didn't have any kids yet.
So just you and your wife,
Yeah.
right? And something else happens with this door handle.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Would you like to tell us?
Yeah, I think I would.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, I was thinking about. So I actually, when I was writing the book, I went back to the church where I became a follower of Jesus through my wife's prayers and influence and the help of some young men in the church. And I actually took a picture of this door handle that I'm getting ready to talk about.
Wow.
So I have a picture of this door handle that I just took a couple of years ago. So anyway, I had a very different experience than my dad did. When I reached out my hand for the door handle, and just pause there for a moment and think about what a sacred moment that is in the life of a church, and in the life of a man, and in the life of his family, if he has one. So first of all, there are the prayers of all those women, mothers, grandmothers, aunties who have been praying sometimes for decades for this man. There is the sovereignty of God that God has been sovereignly orchestrating all human events in this man's life to bring him to the point where he now finally is reaching out. Third, there's the courage of the man himself to overcome all of the fears and so forth that he would have, and all the fears he might have about what's on the other side of the door. And then you have all the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms that are working against it. So you have all these things going on. So this is not just a guy reaching out for a door handle. This is a very sacred moment. And so the church that we picked, I had the exact opposite experience of my dad. There were some men in that church who had given serious consideration to the implications of me opening that door and coming in with my wife.
So we're not just going to put Pat to work. We know maybe what he needs.
Yeah. So why did he do that? That's question number one. Why would a young man do that? What are the problems that he's trying to solve? Mm-hmm. What does he need from us? And then how do we structure our church so we can give him and his wife and his kids when and if he has them, give them what they need. And so they had thought through this. And so they did take me under their wing, and they did show me the ropes. They did explain the gospel to me. And eventually I did pull out my white handkerchief and surrender my life to Jesus because of the church, which is so fascinating because I had such a low view of the church because I've seen what happened to my family. My family just basically disintegrated. My nuclear family that I grew up in basically disintegrated when we dechurched over a period of a few years. And then my life, it's just the grace of God. That's the only explanation. It's just grace. God graciously grafted the gospel of his son Jesus back into my family line through my wife. So my wife is the reason that I became a follower of Jesus. And so obviously I'm so thankful to her, but I'm just so thankful also to the church there. And so this is all about rethinking your parents' story, right? Mm-hmm. So part of rethinking my parents' story is understanding that they were, in a sense, I haven't ever said it this way before. I'll just say it. What happened to my parents and their 4 little boys is just so unfair. I'll go ahead and say it. They were robbed. They were robbed. The thief comes to steal. They were robbed of something that I was, by the grace of God, allowed to have. It doesn't seem fair. I can't explain it, don't understand it. But the final piece of the story in rethinking my parents' story is that because I had forgiven them and then became a follower of Jesus, then forgiven them, and then gone through these other steps that I'm explaining in the book. Again, I like the magic. It took me 28 years, and I've got a 28-day workbook coming out. So you
28-year workbook.
28-day workbook, so that somebody can work through what took me all these decades to do. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough.
I have a 75-year workbook. It's called the Bible.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Oh, man. But yeah, reasons to rethink our parents' story. It just opens up all the forgiveness. But I loved this bulleted list. It was so simple. Like really thinking about your parents' story, what they went through. Was food always on the table? It's a different conversation, like you said. You're going to have each person that you talk to is going to have a different story, right? But there is a whole lot of people that have this like kind of confusing story, and so we're trying to make sense of it, right? Because these wounds don't make sense. It's like my parents were nice, they were well dressed, but they're also really mean. I didn't understand what the heck, and you're just trapped. But was there food on the table? Well, there was food on the table. And was it because they were out doing some hard things? Now that you're becoming a man and you're entering the real world and you're seeing how ruthless the world is, it's like, oh man, my parents were dealing with all this ruthlessness so that I could eat, and sometimes they did say XOXO on a piece of paper and, reconnecting to the truth, the real narrative. But here are some of the reasons to rethink. They didn't have the right temperament. They were not resilient. They had their own childhood wounds that they never healed. They were not the gleam in their parents' eyes, or no one took them under their wing to model healthy, loving parenting. Yeah. Right? And it's just such a merciful thing. Did my parents really get what they needed growing up? It's just a great question to sit on the leather armchair and ask, like, did they really get what they needed? What kind of childhood wounds might my parents have? Are they really equipped to give me these things that I'm so frustrated that I didn't get?
Yeah, hopefully your parents were cycle breakers. And and this is just all interesting information for you that you can use in your ministry to men, or you can use in the life of a loved one. But there's also a good chance that this is something you're relating to personally as well.
Yeah.
And my wife's father was a cycle breaker. So his father, in fact, the chairs sitting around my office are from my grandfather's, her grandfather's office. He was the CEO of a major company, and so my wife's father, the only time his father, my wife's grandfather, that's not confusing, right? Actually ever remembered being touched by his dad was when a bee flew into their car and stung my wife's father, and his father reached over and patted him on the knee. That was the only time he could ever remember being physically touched. And so, but you see, my father-in-law, most loving, caring, kind, I mean, all the fruit of the Spirit, you name it, and humble and wise and so hopeful and so optimistic and seeing the best in other people. I mean, like a complete cycle breaker. So you can do that. If you're listening to this podcast, you can be that man. Now, he was the most influential man in my life, human man in my life, Patsy's father. He's my business mentor. We became best friends for the last 8 years of his life. They moved up here. We had lunch once a week, and more often than that, but had a standing weekly luncheon date for the last 8 years of his life. And he really was. We really became throughout the years really close friends. But it happened because he was resilient. He was resilient. Mm-hmm. And so you may have that natural resilience. So what we're talking about may come easier to you, but you may not be naturally resilient. And guess what? That might be genetic too. Maybe your parents weren't resilient either, but you can be a cycle breaker. You can do that by reverse engineering from where you want to be to where you are today, and then reverse engineering from where you are today to what happened to you as a child, and then go through this healing process that we're talking about. We haven't talked about reverse engineering yet in these podcasts.
No.
But we talk about it all the time.
We've been mushy. No, I'm just kidding.
We've been talking about reverse engineering a lot, though, and how we can help more men.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, reverse engineering is, I would actually say it's very humble, right? Because you actually have a goal and you're excited about it and passionate, and that's all that stuff over here.
Yep.
Right? And I'm jokingly saying that's mushy.
Well, it's the vision that gets the passion going.
Right, and it's so special. Without a vision, the people perish. But then the humility side is the reverse engineering. It's so simple. It's writing down all the steps necessary to make it successful. And you're going to love the last part, right? Write down all the steps to make it successful, divide them into the right categories, right? And then assign due dates to them and deadlines so that you can hold yourself accountable. And so that you can literally say yes or no to something being done or not. Did I fulfill this commitment and this promise, to myself and to my friends? And it's not sexy, but it is humble, and it is actually what produces the vision, so.
If anybody's ever been in a transportation system where either the trains or the buses were not running on time, knows how important this
reverse engineering.
Yeah. I just got back, as you know, from Switzerland. I went over there and did some hiking, and everything over there is done by train. But it's unbelievable. I was just so impressed. You hear about German engineering, well, maybe Swiss engineering is just right up there with it. When we talk about keeping the trains running on time, or my watch runs like a Swiss watch. That's something we used to say back in the day. Something runs like a Swiss watch means there's precision. And then the trains, they run with such precision. And they can be right next to houses because they don't go clackety-clack, clackety-clack. They're silent. And a train will pull up to a platform, and the doors open. People get off. People get on. The doors close. The train takes off. 2 minutes later, another train arrives at the same platform. How do they do that? Well, they do that by reverse engineering. And so at a much more modest and less intense level, what we're doing here is we're helping a man reverse engineer to be the man he wants to become by addressing the man he is, by addressing how he got to be the man that he is.
Amen. I have to tell you this story.
All right.
So there's this goo, apparently, this bacteria, okay? And so this speaks to some of my perspectives on life, right? So there's this one very practical way of reverse engineering things, which is just, it's gritty, list it out, commit to it, do it. A righteous man keeps his word even when it's to his own harm, right? But then there's this goo that God made, okay? And it's real. It's a bacteria. And the Japanese engineers used this to reroute the subway system in Japan. This is crazy, right? And so this goo is, it finds the most efficient path to food, right? So what they did was they put it all on a, I'll send you the video. It's amazing. They put the street system of Japan, right, onto a board, and they put different pieces of food like in different areas, right? And they let this bacteria crawl, right, and find the most efficient pathway around the underground of Japan. Like, this is real. And then at first it was kind of odd and it wasn't finding the right way. And then it reorganized itself as it does. And this, apparently the engineers looked at it all before they built it, and it was like 60% more efficient than anything that they had come up with. You know?
Whoa.
I know, it's so cool.
It's a little spooky.
Yeah, it is. And so, like, this is my emphasis on, you know, the difference between extracting principles and ideas like from scripture and trying to put them into play, but sometimes it can be frustrating, whereas like, Lord, like, just help me, you know, and the goo.
I think those things are two very compatible ideas.
Yeah, I want to hear.
Yeah, so my first discipler was a guy named Jim Gillian, and he said, he always said, you can choose your way, but not the result. You can choose your way, but not the result. So he was saying, you know, you do have free will. You can make your own decisions. But if you choose to exercise, you're going to be healthy. If you choose not to exercise, you know, 20 or 30 years from now, you're going to be paying the price for that. That kind of an idea. Oh, same way with spiritual things. But he was an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
He was an engineer. And so he had this emphasis on understanding what needed to be done and then putting the structures in place to do it, which is what we're talking about, you know, the who does what by one thing. And then the flip side of that is that, and this is one of my philosophies, is that I have found that the Holy Spirit tends to do his best work, the goo. The Holy Spirit tends to do his best work when I do my best work. Mm-hmm. Now, the Holy Spirit doesn't need me to be organized, to be obedient, to be structured, to keep my word, to do, you know, to be faithful. He doesn't need that. He can always provide a miracle.
Who would want to do all those things anyway?
Yeah. He can always provide a miracle, right? But it just, he seems to do better work when I do good work myself.
Yeah, it's not like God's calling us to obedience or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, again, obedience is the trademark of a biblical Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I think is interesting and cool about this chapter, I thought it was pretty sneaky of you, is that in the beginning you asked a question right off the start. You said, where do you see, when you think about your parents, where do you see them on this continuum? Are they good-hearted? Are they well-intentioned? Are they dysfunctional? Are they uncaring, toxic, or all the way to evil, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a continuum, rate it from left to right, you know, circle the ones that you wanted to. And I circled two. I said well-intentioned and dysfunctional, right? And my parents were not uncaring. They definitely weren't toxic or evil. But then you were sneaky, because at the end of the chapter, you put the same rating. You put the same question.
I don't think that's sneaky.
I think
it's
sneaky.
Practical. It's practical.
It's very practical, but it was. I felt snuck up. You know, have you ever heard Jehovah Sneaky? You know, like you ever heard that? No, yeah. But Jehovah Isi, right, is one of God's names, and then people made a joke, Jehovah Sneaky. But anyways, yeah, God sneaks up on us sometimes. I felt like you putting that question at the end was sneaky because I just took all this time to reflect on my parents' story, and I was like, yeah, my dad does face a lot of difficulty, and my mom's back is broken, and they've overcame so much. Oh, praise God. And then so now how do you feel about your parents? And I'm like, oh, you know, they're well-intentioned and they're good-hearted. You know, like, so I swung to the left. But yeah, it's so important. I love this chapter. It's
Praise
so
the
important.
Lord, by the way.
Oh yeah, right. That's real heart change.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But
that's a win.
Yeah, it is a win.
It's a win for the gospel.
That's why you wrote the book.
That's why we wrote the book.
Yeah. It works. It's good. But yeah, rethinking our parents' stories.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah. Yeah, and now we need to figure out how to rebuild the relationships with them, and we'll get into those in the next couple of podcasts as well.
Right, because a lot of that's introspective. It's at home,
Yeah.
right? It's with the book. It's with trusted friends. But now
And so, if you get to a place where you have successfully been able to rethink it, all right, well, now you might want to actually take a step towards your parents. So I want to show you how you can do that. And I also want to show men how what to do if they can't do that, or if they need to set up some boundaries, and how to have an awkward conversation with your parents. I'll show you exactly how to do that, even suggestions on what to say. But it's so doable. It's just going to seem, when you have the thought, like it's terrifying to actually, I'm going to initiate a conversation with my parents, but it's so worth it.
Amen. Cliffhanger. I'm excited. Well, that was chapter 11 of From Broken Boy to Mended Man. I always like reminding people, if you're getting a lot out of this podcast, if you're enjoying what's going on, just remember, this is not a book that you just read. It's a book that you do. So make sure that you pick yourself up a copy, and don't take a year and a half to fill out all the worksheets at the end of each chapter like I did, and fill them out as you go. But it's a very powerful, practical book that is better served when you do it. So you can get a copy at patrickmorley.com. Also, you can get a copy now at patmorley.com. We got patmorley.com.
It's a redirect, right?
It redirects, yes. So that's nice to have both of
Good
those.
work.
But
Good work. Yeah.
Thank you. But yes, either of those websites will work. patmorley.com, patrickmorley.com, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah, see you in the next one. Love you, everybody.